Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Civil Division webinar. We're very glad to have you with us, and we're going to look at a significant public transport initiative currently underway, which is the Connecting Ireland Rural Mobility Plan, which is intended to improve connectivity for people living in rural towns, villages, dispersed communities. And it aims to do this in three main ways: high-frequency services, enhancing existing routes, and strengthening links to the wider public transport network. Taken together, the changes are intended to help make public transport a more realistic and reliable option for people around the country. We're delighted to be joined by Conor O'Donovan, Senior Transport Planner with the National Transport Authority. Conor has been with the NTA since its establishment in 2009, and he has played a central role in a wide range of strategic planning projects, including major city bus network redesigns and the Greater Dublin Area Transport Strategy. He now manages the Connecting Ireland Rural Mobility Programme. Today, Conor is going to give us an overview on the background to the plan, progress to date, outcomes achieved so far, key lessons learned, and what the next phase of delivery will look like. So, Conor, thank you for joining us today, and I'll now hand over to you to begin the presentation.
Thanks, Peter, and thank you for the invitation today. I'm certainly delighted to share our experiences with on Connecting Ireland. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so so Peter gave me an introduction. Yeah, working for DTO NTA since 2005. It's been a long time in the authority and previously with the DTO. Worked on various different projects, as Peter outlined, including various different bus network reviews, transport strategy 2016 to 2035, and bus network infrastructure plan for Dublin. I worked as deciding and appeals officer for the Public Transport Regulation Division in the authority, and I'm responsible for planning and design of new public transport routes nationally, including the Navan Town Service, 139 bus service, 175 bus service in Dublin, and a range of services across the country. I'm currently working in the Transport Service Planning section, which is responsible for service planning across the state, and I'm currently managing the Connecting Ireland Rural Mobility Programme. So, second, on. So I suppose today I plan to just give a brief introduction to what the authority does and its role in relation to public transport services. I'm going to briefly talk about rural transport in general and the transport coordination units. I'm then going to discuss Connecting Ireland. I'm going to go through the details, the background. I'm going to talk about some projects within that program, and then I plan to talk about our new TFI on Shaw project. That's a pilot project that's ongoing, and then finally I'll go through some of the lessons learned through the process, and then I believe we're going to have a question and answer session afterwards. So many of you may know about the NTA, but it's for those who don't, it's a statutory non-commercial body which operates under the Department of Transport and is responsible for developing and implementing strategies to provide high-quality, accessible, sustainable transport. And in relation to public transport, the principal function of the authority is to promote the development of an integrated, accessible public transport network. The authority oversees public service obligation, PSO services. They're publicly funded public transport services. It's supposed to ensure that all bus and rail services are available to communities in all parts of the country under the TFI brand. I'm sure you all know that, but there may be some people out there who don't. So in relation to rural transport, what are we talking about and what are we going to be talking about today? So rural transport consists of a range of different, operations. And so the main focus today will be on the bus air and contracted services and the local link regular services. And they're the mainstay of the Connecting Ireland rural bus network. But also there are other operators which operate across the country, which do have a role in rural transport, such as commercially licensed services, particularly between cities, local link demand responsive transport, which I'll be talking about later, and app-based demand responsive transport, which again I'll be talking about later. And we have other services such as HSE services, school services, Hackney community cars, rail services, and then we have other contracted services that the authority would purchase from the market, such as the 139 service in between Blanchardstown and Naas, and they're directly tendered. So that's the full range of rural transport services, but we primarily be focused on bus air and contracted services and local link services today, with a bit on app-based demand responsive transport. Just to briefly mention the rural transport program, which is I suppose was transferred. Its responsibility for the program was assigned to the National Transport Authority in 2012 and rebranded to TFI Localink. It was previously under the aegis of Pobble, and it was transferred over to the authority. And so we now have a rural transport program team in here who looks after the local links across the country. The funding has grown quite a lot over the last few years, from 12 million euros to 90 million euros in 2025. That's a significant investment in rural transport across the country. There are 15 transport coordination units who manage TFI Localink on behalf of the authority. For today, I'll be interworking TCUs with Localinks. When I'm referring to Localink, I'm referring to the 15 TCUs. Of course, they are in various parts of the country who work to implement the services that we specify. They're responsible for operating over 200 rural regular services and 1,000 demand responsive routes. So it's a fairly large network that's out there in rural Ireland that they operate. Regular rural bus services are those which offer fixed routes between towns and services that operate to a scheduled timetable. And DRT services are more bespoke services which could collect people, pre-booked passengers directly at their homes and drop them off to their homes. So the Connecting Ireland Rural Mobility Programme, it really commenced in, I think it was around 2018, 2019 period. It was one of my old colleagues, Marion Wilson, was one of the instigators. The question that really started off this plan was that what would it take to live in rural Ireland without a car, i.e. contribute socially and economically? I suppose the rural network across the state before 2021, before we started implementing the Connecting Ireland Rural Mobility Plan, was patchy. So we had good services in certain areas, and in other areas we had nothing. Or maybe you might have one service per day, per week, or maybe one service per week, per direction. And so it was pretty much variable across the country. And I suppose this stat is one that I actually pulled out from the original documentation, which shows the extent of, I suppose, the famine of public transport in rural Ireland. In 2021, there was 188 settlements in rural Ireland were not served by regular public transport. And that could be small, and by settlements I mean CSO settlements, so minimum 50 houses in an area. So, you know, we're talking about some small areas, but we're also talking about some larger settlements which did not have any public transport. And 42% of villages did not make public transit connections to their local centre. So there was no doubt there was a shortage of public transport across the country. And I suppose the aim of the Connecting Ireland Rural Mobility Plan was to identify where those shortages were and effectively come up with a network plan to address those concerns. one of the debates that we had at the start of the programme was, well, what is the minimum offer we would have to give for Connecting Ireland for settlements in rural Ireland? And so regardless of whatever the subsidy was. I suppose the ultimately what we came up with as a minimum standard was 3 services per day per direction, Monday to Sunday. Now, I stress that's a minimum standard. We do have services out there which are that standard, but generally as the program went on, there was more demands put on the services that we were putting out. So, for example, if we ran out of capacity, if the services were too popular, we had to put on additional frequency, or else during the last 4 years of the operation of Connecting Ireland, there's been more demands for nighttime services, and certainly the nighttime economy initiatives have been quite instrumental in pushing us to provide more evening services, and certainly they're very popular with residents. So what is Connecting Ireland? So it's a major public transport initiative developed by the NTA with the aim of increasing connectivity, particularly for people living outside our major cities and towns. The plan aims to improve mobility in rural areas, and will do this by providing better connections between villages and towns through the development of a comprehensive rural transport network. It was envisaged as a 5-year programme of public transport improvements, and consisted of a range of regional and local bus service improvements and pilots of complementary non-conventional transport improvements. So in relation to the regional and the local bus services, we decided very early on that when we were designing the network, that it would be a hub and spoke network design, so that local services would feed into more frequent regional services which would operate between major settlements across the country. And that's the way we designed it. And we saw the local bus as feeding into the local centre for onward connections. And so they're designed in the main to integrate with the regional services, whether that be rail or bus. It's a plan-led intensification of this authority's service review process. So previous to Connecting Ireland plan, the authority would have designed services on reasonably ad hoc basis. That there would have been areas would have been struggling in terms of capacity, and we would have dealt with that, and we would have dealt with different areas across the country. I suppose the benefit of Connecting Ireland as a plan is that it led us to, I suppose, intensify how we looked at areas, and it was a more comprehensive approach to what we had previously done. Our approach was to offer a viable alternative to car across the. Now, it's not. I suppose the issue with rural transport is that it's actually very, very hard to provide an alternative to car, particularly in very, very rural areas. However, I suppose our approach was that we, provide a service that allows people to actually do alternative things, and it may be that you might not have 2 cars, but you could have 1 car, and then someone could kids could use the public transport to go to school, or to go to their sports activities, and then it just lessens the pressure on people to have a car, or a second car, or a third car in case of a round. And then it was the key element of the Connecting Ireland plan was a partnership approach. So we worked very, very closely with our local and colleagues, with Bus Éireann and other operators. And also we worked with local authorities, stakeholders, and public representatives to design and implement the new network. So the objective was to connect more people to more places and opportunities. As Jarrett Walker, one of the people I used to work with, consultants working on the network plan in Dublin, used to say, to provide more liberty to people to get around, and so more opportunities to more places. to provide an alternative service to the car for some trips, providing an integrated and useful network for residents, tourists, and a plan-led approach. So it's a systematic and strategic approach to planning public transport in rural Ireland. So, of course, there's a large amount of people who live outside of established settlements and smaller towns. Roughly 30% of the population back in 2017 lived in one-off houses or urban developments outside of towns, and only 44% of people in rural Ireland were living within 15 minutes of a bus stop. So in sparsely populated, dispersed areas, a fixed route service it may not be the appropriate solution. So we had to tailor our approach. So we considered that we had to expand the current bespoke DRT network and to see if we could innovate in this area in providing public transport connectivity. I suppose it's really the overall aim would be to connect outlying areas with their nearest settlement where possible. So the timeline of Connecting Ireland. So we started analysing the network back in 2019, 2020. We designed a high-level network in 2020, went out to stakeholder engagement back in 2020 and 21. Basically, we were talking to local authorities, TCUs, public representatives, councillors, government agencies, all sorts, very wide a circle of people we engage with. We had a public consultation in 2021, which attracted 3,500 submissions. We published the results of the public consultation in 2022, and very quickly we were into implementation in mid. It basically started in May 2022, and it's been ongoing since then. I would say in 2020 we had a little bit of a kind of a test run of the principles as part of a program of funding which was done post-COVID. There was a stimulus program which was implemented in late 2020, where the government gave a large amount of funding for new services, both town, city and rural services. And as part of that funding package, we implemented the 450 service between Lewisburg and Achill. We implemented the 800 service in Wicklow between Arklow and Carlow. So there was quite a few services we implemented in advance of the Connecting Ireland plan being official, but it was effectively a dry run for the services that we were implementing. So we were given by the state, by Department of Transport, €5 million to implement in 2022. And I suppose the difficulty in getting €5 million is in May 2022 is that it has to be spent within that 6 month period, well, a 7 month period. So it meant that we had to ramp up the implementation very, very quickly. Get the TCUs on board, get Bus Éireann on board, and try to just get the project implemented while there was funding available. Of course, there has been funding all the way along. In 2023, 24 and 25, we had funding, and I'll talk about the funding situation later on. The map was produced. It's Connecting Ireland Proposed Transport Map. This is the network. This actually map that I have on the screen is actually a very recent upload up into our website. So if anyone wants to have a look at it, it's on the National Transport website. This is an iteration of the first map, which was published in 2021. And the iteration has happened because there's been, I would say, over 1,000 changes to the network since we commenced design of the network. And the reason why it has changed is because it's an iterative process. The first map that we published as part of the Connecting Ireland plan back in 2021 was very high level. We had our objectives in relation to it, but it could only be, I suppose, implemented through negotiation with our partners in Localink and also Bus Éireann, and also through negotiations with public representatives and feedback from members of the public. So the plan has been constantly iterated. I'd say this is about the 20th version of the plan. We managed to publish this in the last 2 weeks because the old plan is now completely out of date. And I'd just like to point out, if you're looking at it and you get a chance to look at it, it's quite a comprehensive map. The main bits that I'd like to point out is that the red lines are local routes that have been implemented as part of Connecting Ireland. The purple routes are stuff that we plan to implement. It may be new services or it may be enhanced services. And then the green lines are regional services. So the dark green line is regional routes that have been implemented under Connecting Ireland, and the lighter green lines are regional routes to be implemented under Connecting Ireland. So we're roughly 2/3 the way through the plan. So lots of purple, but lots of red, where we have implemented stuff across the country. So in relation to Connecting Ireland principles, in designing timetables, I already mentioned that we have a minimum standard of 3 services per day per direction. But in relation to timetables, we look to increase the frequency on existing routes to attract more passengers, design more useful, integrated and more legible timetables, which are simple to follow. We try to schedule trips to arrive into a higher order centre before 9 o'clock and get back in the evening, so that people can do a work trip or an education trip. We try to provide for trips in the middle of the day for shopping or health appointments, or visiting friends and family. We're trying to provide, as I said earlier, provide 7 services 7 days a week, and provide local routes that connect with smaller settlements of the regional transport network, which I was talking about earlier, and also to serve key locations such as hospitals and train stations and education institutes where possible. And in some cases, that's not possible given the location of some of these places. So the delivery of the Connecting Ireland network was delivered through a number of mechanisms. First of all, the Localink PSO services, revision of PSO operator contracts such as Bus Éireann and Irish Rail, new PSO direct award contracts. That's where we go out to the market and get, I suppose, operators to run our services. We have licensed services. So in some cases, we talk to an awful lot of the operators who are currently operating commercial services to see if they can improve their services to bring it up to Connecting Ireland standards. Been a very, very difficult process, but it has been successful in parts of the country where we would have had maybe a 6-day-a-week service, licensed service, and they've the private operators have increased it to 7 days a week without any funding from the state. We've also partnered up with licensed operators, and we're looking to partner up with licensed operators to provide additional services through direct funding. And then we have our non-conventional public transport, such as DRT and app-based DRT. So this is a map of the Connecting Ireland routes that were implemented since 2022, since May 22. So we're roughly 4 years into the implementation cycle. And you can see the extent of the, I suppose, the national spread of services that we have implemented. The blue is 2022. The red are services that were implemented or enhanced in 2023. The green is 24, and the pink is 2025. I would like to point out, in some cases, there are routes where we implemented in 2022, and we had to come along in 2024 and upgrade them because they were under pressure, or there was lots of demand that we had to serve. So there could be multiple iterations of an existing service that's out there. But this shows you the extent and breadth of services that have been delivered across the country. To date, 184 new or enhanced services have been implemented across rural Ireland. 36 projects were delivered last year, 38 in 22, 65 in 23, which was the peak, and 45 in 2024. I'd just say in 2023, it was enormously pressurized environment to get out such a high volume of services. We at the same time as we had the Ukrainian war, which meant there was a shortage of fleet. We had to put on additional Ukrainian services for refugees all across the country, and also the operators of local link service had to get up to speed to, I suppose, develop the capacity to roll out these services. So, and also we had to recruit drivers, mechanics, and all that, and across the industry. So really, the industry has stepped up to the plate and delivered a huge amount of services over a very, very short period of time. And I'd also say the same about Bus Éireann and other operators who are under our stable. Bus Éireann would have done, particularly in the early stages of Connecting Ireland, would have radically improved some of the services that are out there, particularly in Limerick, Tramore, Sligo, and that required enormous expansion in their recruitment and their training programs and fleet. So it's been quite, it's actually settled down a lot since, and it isn't as much pressure as 2023. And certainly there is a capacity there now within the industry to provide for the level of growth that we envisage. We're looking to, subject to funding, of course, provide a further 90 enhanced or new services. And that could be minor enhancements or significant improvements to major corridors and regional services. The overall net cost of the programme to the end of 2025 is 56 million. We're probably looking at another 25 million additional cost to finish off the Connecting Ireland programme. But it's like any network, it will require love, it requires attention. And so, the network is always growing in relation to demand, particularly in relation to commuting services, where we are under considerable pressure to provide additional capacity at peak times. This is a map of Ireland which shows you all the rural settlements that have benefited from enhanced services or new services under the Connecting Ireland plan. So you can see again the spread of all the settlements. 87 of these settlements had no public transport before the plan was implemented. And even though we were quite rushed in how we did our work and tried to get it out as quickly as possible, 96% of people in our last satisfaction survey said they were very satisfied with the service provided by LocalLink. Not as high with Bus Éireann, but it's still very high. And I just wanted to put down a list of the settlements that are served by individual routes. So the next slide will show you the settlement, and it'll show you the route number alongside it. And you can see here all the places that have benefited from new services across the country. And it's only when you see the entire list that you realise the scale of the achievement for LocalLink and Bus Éireann and other operators to be able to roll out such a high volume of services over a very, very short period of time, and effectively radically change the landscape for rural transport over a short period of time. So the next slide I just want to talk about is just going to a tiny bit more detail on some services we've rolled out, say, for example, in Kerry. So you can see here, this is a map of the Dingle Peninsula, Ivory Peninsula, Beara Peninsula, and Sheep's Head. And you can see here all the amount of services. There's like 13 or 14 services here, where the network in this area has been transformed from a network that was characterized by low frequency services. And now we have regular, frequent, accessible services, particularly in tourist areas where, particularly in the height of summer, there's a lot of demand out here for movement by public transport, and it gives people an option to move around by public transport. Just a small note that you can see that on all the numbers are quite consistent, the numbering for all the routes out here. And so as part of our process, we actually had to write a new numbering scheme for the country to ensure a consistent pattern across the state. So we have a new policy, which is a nice. There's been a few things that we've done as part of quite a few things as part of the Connecting Ireland programme, which is improving processes, improving information that's out there, which has been a really useful part of the programme, which is probably unseen, but it's happening in the background. And just to say, in relation to Kerry TCU and focusing on Kerry TCU, you can see the scale of growth in Kerry from 13,000 people a year using their services, regular services, up to nearly 400,000, over 400,000 people. But the same thing applies to Bus Éireann, where we've grown from roughly 164,000 to roughly 350,000. So overall, there's been a roughly 4.5 times growth of patronage in the Kerry area. And the networks, when we sat down to design the network in Kerry, we sat down with the local link, and we redesigned actually what we had originally planned. And it's actually worked out really, really well in relation to the services that are out there, and they're very suited to the people who are using the services. This is just a quick example of a timetable, a typical timetable that we've worked up. This is the 280 timetable, which operates on the Ivory Peninsula between Waterford and Killarney on the Ring of Kerry. It was launched in 2023, replaced a low-frequency Bus Éireann bus service. It was designed to integrate with the regional 279 Bus Éireann service, which was redesigned with higher frequency, and the train service in Killarney. Provided a peak evening service from Killorglin into Killorglin and onward, services to Killarney and Tralee for education and work purposes. The timetable was designed to be memorable, legible, with weekend services and later evening services, consistent routing across the week. And just in relation to this timetable, this is, I think, the third or fourth iteration of the timetable, because every time we have to go back to it, there's been huge pressure to improve this service, increase the services in the evening. So we've actually expanded it over throughout the course of Connecting Ireland. So that's in the last. We expanded in 2024 and in 2025. And this is an illustration of the weekly patronage on the route. On that particular route, you see it peaks at about 3,000 a week, 3,000 passengers a week in the summer, and it's still growing. So I hopefully there'll be a lot more growth coming out of this particular service over the next couple of years, even with the current level of offer. And I would say that it's not just the summer season where the numbers are quite high. It's actually off-peak. There's actually high numbers of people using these services. So it's good to see that it's not just a tourist thing in the middle of summer. I just want to talk about, move on to a segue to TFI on Shaw. So I mentioned earlier about providing for residents who are living in more rural areas, more dispersed areas, and our initiative to counter or to serve those areas was TFI and Shaw, which was launched in 2025, and it's a demand responsive transit service, which was initially piloted in Achill, Killarney, Northeast Limerick City. Basically, it's an app-based demand service. So you go onto the app if you're in Achill, Ireland. You say where you want to go in advance, and the bus comes along and picks you up and drops you into Achill Sound or Morani for onward connections to Westport or Castlebar. So it doesn't follow a traditional route. It operates where passengers need to go within the area. And since it's launched in 2025, it carried 60,000 passengers and now carrying about 3,500 passengers per week. This is the map of the Achill network. As you can see here, the red line is the 450 service, which was upgraded in 2020, and the blue line is the 460 service, which was implemented about a couple of months ago, actually, providing services between Achill Sound and Castlebar and Achill and Westport. So yes, you have to book in advance. There's distance-based fares, and we expanded the hours back in 20th of October. So now they operate 7 to 8, Monday to Sunday. This is a map of the demands of the individual demands. So the larger the circles, the more people are using the service in ACL. So it gives you a good flavour from our software that we use for the pilot of where the demand is and how people move in the area. So what's next? What's next is that we're currently waiting for confirmation of funding for 2026 projects. We roughly have about 50 projects which are ready to go, planning done, timetables designed, and all we're waiting for is confirmation of funding from the Department of Transport. We're currently engaged with licensed operators, TCUs, Bus Éireann, Go Ahead, to align services with Connecting Ireland objectives. We're refining the plan, as I mentioned earlier, to take account of feedback. Another side benefit from the Connecting Ireland Rural Mobility Plan is we have done an awful lot of work on improving the journey planner information for rural transport services and license information for rural transport services. We've audited the entire stops database to ensure that the stop locations are more accurate, that we have full Irish translations of all the stops. We've deleted stops that are not used. And we've also designed our stops to be unique names so that they act as a kind of, if you're going to a town, that's a unique name, and it's for the inbound and outbound service. So it becomes an interchange stop, and so it becomes a lot easier to navigate the network, and ultimately that'll feed through to mapping of the routes. I briefly mentioned about we're looking to integrate our lower frequency services, our DRT, our healthcare, our community services. So we're working with our colleagues in Local Link Donegal, Sligo, Leitrim on a pilot project for that, where we amalgamate all the services into one model, and it makes it more efficient and more effective. And hopefully we'll have some of the smarter DRT software over time. That'll happen hopefully. And then we're rolling across bus infrastructure across the country through BSEP, our bus stop enhancement programme, and other initiatives. Just in relation to bus stops, we have 12,500 bus stops across the country, which are active, 2,500 bus shelters, and 7,000 bus stop poles. So we're currently replacing all our poles across the country with the new yellow and green branded poles with carousels. Excuse me. You can see the example there in Fanor in West Clare. On the right hand side, we're trying to prioritise the amount of stops that are going out because it's such a high volume of stops that need to be delivered across rural Ireland, and we have to prioritise to ensure that I suppose the higher order settlements get bus stops, and then I suppose more difficult, very ultra rural stops will be delivered as part of that as well. And the bus stop enhancement programme has been established to upgrade bus stops, and there's been €500,000 being allocated annually to each of the local authorities. They're making progress. Some local authorities are making more progress than others, but certainly there is more bus stops popping up here, there, across the country. And so I think over the next year or so, I think that'll accelerate. It'll definitely accelerate given the work that's been done over the last couple of years. So the impacts of the new service. So we've increased businesses for local shops and cafes along the routes. There's been a reduction of private transport with increasing numbers travelling on the TFI network. Greater access to health facilities and employment opportunities. Improved connections to bus services and Irish Rail. And just as an aside, it's actually quite difficult to manage that integration with Irish Rail and bus services. We try to do it as much as possible, but it may not be possible given the other demands on the services to provide for local connections and local attractions at certain times. With the housing shortage over the last few years, lots of college students have been using our services to commute longer distances to colleges and institutes. It gives them opportunities where they may not have had before. It's radically improved the quality of life for residents. I think some people, they weren't expecting a public transport service, and once they had it, they realised that, for older people, younger people, it gives it improves their life because they have much greater accessibility to destinations and attractions. And certainly, we have had lots of correspondence in from passengers who have been very happy with the offer that they've gotten. Because there's a large amount of people in rural areas who don't have cars, who don't have access to cars, and they're kind of the forgotten people. I suppose the Connecting Ireland and the Towns programme have provided for these people. And there's an increasing culture of public transport use in rural areas, whether it's for evening services, going out socialising, to go to sporting facilities, for socialising. It certainly is. We've seen a massive increase in people using it for those purposes. So it's all very positive. So in relation to the benefits of the approach, so routes are now being planned on an equal basis across the country. We no longer plan on an ad hoc basis. And also where we get queries in from public representatives, of which we get quite a few, we are able to address those very clearly. We have a plan for most areas. And so it means that, there isn't a gap in the network that we haven't thought of or considered. In relation to the plan, as I said, is consistently being refined. So it's not a static plan. It's a living, breathing, changing plan that's evolving, taking into account operators, agencies, and members of the public. And this is there's a lot more resources in the authority has been allocated to service planning, which is facilitated improvement in quality control, journey plan improvements, data improvements, and consistency of service definition. And the one thing we have noticed is more so is that routes are being considered as part of statutory plans and development plans in local authorities. So in relation to lessons learned, and I'll finish up fairly soon. So first of all, the importance of a plan and effective delivery mechanisms. So the structure of the authority, whether it's the contracts, our contracts side, we have a contracts section, which where we can roll out contracts fairly quickly with operators. We have the TCU set up with local links who are extremely effective at delivery and very close to local people in their local areas. Very, very flexible. And then we have our rural transport team in here who, I suppose, monitor the contracts and work with the local links to ensure that the contracts get delivered quickly. And so all that structure has allowed, I suppose, the planners to come along and plan the network. And, when the network is planned, that can be delivered. The other important part is that the planners have been involved in the implementation all the way through to post review of services. So it wasn't a point in relation to this particular project. It wasn't the case that planners planned it and then someone else implemented. The planners were uniquely involved in designing it and also working with the TCUs to implement it, or working with Bus Éireann to implement the services. You need effective government structures to enable growth in public transport services. Requires nimble, committed and effective delivery partners, which I mentioned in relation to Bus Éireann and Localink. One of the key aspects of Connecting Ireland was to move quickly. Funding doesn't stay around forever. So while you have funding, you have to move very, very quickly. And so we made it a priority to do it, implementation quickly, rather than having a lengthy deliberation about routes. That we took a very, very quick, I would say, it was informed, but we didn't sit on our laurels. We tried to get through it as quickly as possible. And given uncertainty over annual funding, we have to have plans ready for implementation. So having timetables ready, having the operators, have them done with their tender processes or have the TCUs lined up to implement services, that's key. So when we get funding, that we're able to move very, very quickly. Certainly engagement with public transport public representatives and members of the public has improved outcomes. It's very difficult and costly at times because there's lots of demands out there, but it is essential to have political support engagement. And it's one of the key elements of Connecting Ireland that it has been very strongly supported by local representatives across the board. It's important to continue to evolve the process, and that the plan is a starting point, but not fixed in concrete. The plan needs to constantly iterate over time to reflect change of priorities. So we need to have a flexible approach to roll out the plan to maximise delivery of services and to spread delivery across the country. So we were looking at different ways of how to prioritise service, and we ended up just going, what's the fastest way to deliver it? So in spreading it out, we were able to get all 15 TCUs and Bus Éireann to really stretch out what they could do across the entire period of the Connecting Ireland plan. Ideally, infrastructure should be aligned with service delivery. And in the case of Connecting Ireland, this was not possible. As if we were to wait for infrastructure delivery, we would have been significantly delayed, and we certainly wouldn't have had 185 services implemented in the last 4 years. Now, infrastructure is catching up. And yes, we can run the services with existing stops. In some cases, we have virtual stops, but we did strike on. And in that case, because of rural transport, we were able to do it. That's less possible in terms of towns services or in terms of metropolitan services, but we struck on at rural services in that way. Regular communication, so we're constantly putting out information on the project and how it's been delivered. And then there's a requirement for consistent financial support over a long period of time, which we've had, in fairness, over the last few years, from 2020 to 2025. And so that's a key to actually implementing quickly and having a production line of services that we can implement. This is my last slide, and then I'll move it across to Peter for questions. This is a map of the regional public transport across the country. This was published last year in 2025, and it's the first comprehensive map of existing routes across the country. So again, it's another one of those side projects which we had to do to demonstrate what the network did. But the happy side of it, or the instance of it, is that we have a new map which is out there which people can use, and we're trying to keep it updated every 6 months. So so I encourage people to have a look at it, and I would say if you see any errors, please send an email into the authority. We're certainly open to hearing any criticisms of the maps and any suggestions for improvements.
Conor, on behalf of everybody who's attended, we want to thank you for a very comprehensive presentation. So with that, I'll draw it to a close, and thank you very much to everybody.